Good morning, everyone. I will call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 76 of the House of Commons, standing on Canadian heritage, and of course, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September 20th of 2022, the committee is meeting to continue its study on safe sport in Canada. We have a number of witnesses in front of us. 4 are in front of us. 2 are video conference today. Miriam Da Silva Rondu from the Olympian and teacher. We have Rachel Den Holdender, I believe. Is that how you pronounce it, I think? The attorney and victim advocate. She is on video conference. Kira McCormick, whistleblower and professional soccer player. Andrea Neal, former Canadian women's national soccer team player and assistant coach. And David Walbridge, a lawyer by video conference. Hi, David. And from Fencing for Change Canada, we have Emily Mason. So for those on video conference, that means Rachel along with David. On the bottom of your screen, there's a globe for translation. And so you will get questions in English and French, so act accordingly. So everyone, we have at least 30 minutes of testimony here this morning, and we'd like to start with Miriam Da Silva Rondo for 5 minutes. And Miriam, the floor is now yours.
Thank you. You have to understand that in sports, everything goes fast. Competitions represent points, and points are what allow us to be selected for training camps or the national team or international competitions. This allows us to obtain a ranking in order to move up the ladder. Now, without these points, we don't advance. So, in this seemingly simple process, here is where it gets complicated. If the athlete refuses to sign the contract that is submitted to them, then they cannot compete. In that case, no points. Timelines are short. We're often talking about a few weeks, sometimes days, when you're being selected to participate in a competition and obtain points. The current whistleblowing processes take months. So I'm going to ask you the following question. If you were in our shoes, would you blow the whistle? Now, there are the points and there's a selection. It may look simple from the outside, but all this is governed by documents that are long and flexibly used by the federations. And at this point in time, I would like the document that I sent last night to be tabled to the clerk. To my knowledge, clerk, we understand that the document was not translated into both official languages, but we would ask that the document be handed out.
Does anyone object to being sent around? I think it's in French, is it not? Both languages?
Documents are in English because it's document from a federation, okay. And my comments are in French.
Okay, it's not perfectly translated, but is that fine if we have it sent around to everybody? Fine? Yes, Ms. Gladue.
Yes, Chair. As long as eventually it's translated in both official languages and sent to the committee, I think that would be fine.
It has been sent to translation, so it could take a little while, but you're fine with that, Chris? Okay. Thank you. Continue.
So, through those documents, à travers ces documents.
So, I sent you these documents. And in those documents, you'll be able to see the summary of how selection criteria from 2011 to 2021 of the Boxing Federation of Canada have changed. These documents are approved by the Board of Directors and Sports Canada's oversight, if there is any, and that can be substantial. With no context and no knowledge of the environment, it's easy to approve a document from behind a desk without asking any questions about it or without questioning it. Again, when athletes use the mechanisms that are in place, it takes months, and the athlete during that time does not attend camps or competitions and does not earn points. So whether we like it or not, whistleblowing is often thought about more than once. by the athletes. There is also a stigma that comes with whistleblowing and using the mechanisms in place. When myself and a teammate made a complaint to the Federation and the high performance director, it took barely 24 hours before we were targeted by coaching staff and athletes, as if we were the ones who were prosecuting the high performance director. Of course, exclusion began, isolation, because those in power are quick to make allies, and I think you can understand why. After 2 weeks, my mental health had greatly diminished. I lost my appetite. I had a sleep disorder. There was self-harm and isolation. So the doctor placed me and my teammate on sick leave. We could have been placed in a safe place, perhaps another gym, another club, while this situation was being resolved. But this was refused by the president of the Federation. Why? Well, because in order to be carded, the financial support of the committee and federations require exclusive, strict, and inflexible rules. If we had been given permission to have some flexibility, then others would have asked for that permission as well. So in the interest of fairness, we actually had to be inactive until we decided to come back to this toxic environment. When we indicated that we wanted to participate in the training camp, our request was denied because we had missed too much of the training. Even though the doctor agreed and a request for accommodation had been made, it was refused. So, of course, we ended up having to lose points, which obviously would inevitably have an influence on our carding and potential selection. Now, I want to remind you that all this was happening at the same time as steps were being taken with Sports Solution towards the Federation and the high performance director. This is a lot to take on for an athlete, but this is how things work right now. You also have to understand that the Federation, and in my case, the high performance director, could terminate my card just by snapping their fingers. Not even yourselves would be able to have any say in this. So it would have been up to me to file a complaint through the various mechanisms in place. And once again, this can take months with no financial resources. And so what do? Well, you simply let go. The current system puts the onus on the athletes to monitor their federation. This monitoring can be costly because any actions, any reports, any whistleblowing, any complaints made within the Canadian sports system can be taken up by each province's own judicial or legal system. So in other words, the system and the process responsible for protecting us are also like a sword, the Damocles sword over our heads. So I'm going to ask you again, in light of all this information, would you blow the whistle? I did. I paid dearly for it in my career, and I still pay the price to this day, both psychologically and financially. How many athletes are going to have to pay the price of their career, their mental health, and their physical health before a national investigation takes place?
Thank you. We'll go to Rachel Den Hollander, who is an attorney and victim advocate. Rachel, you have 5 minutes, so please go.
Thank you, members of Parliament. It is a privilege to be here with all of you today. Like so many others who have testified to this committee, I am also a survivor of sexual abuse in the athletic community, having been victimized by Dr. Larry Nassar, the former Olympic team physician for our United States women's gymnastics team. I am also an attorney with a background in public policy, and my professional field of expertise is abuse prevention, crisis response, and institutional transformation. I am privileged to educate at our U.S. military academies, medical conferences, law school and bar associations, as well as universities, nonprofits, law enforcement agencies, and the largest Protestant religious denominations in our country. And often when I come in to work with these groups, I am asked, what is the most important thing that we can do to prevent abuse, with the expectation that my response will be some sort of policy change or education program that can take place. But this is incorrect, because policy changes and education programs are only as good as the motivation and the knowledge that accompanies them. If any institution is truly serious about preventing child abuse, the single most important thing that they can do is pursue honest and transparent assessments. Far too often, when an abuse crisis occurs, whether it is in the athletic community, the religious world, universities, the response of leadership is to attempt to simply move forward with education and reform. Let's move our organization into the future. And this is a critical error for two reasons. First, when harm has occurred, it is the responsibility of the organization and the leadership to aid in the healing. Now, as adults, we know this. We teach our children to accept responsibility for the harm they perpetrate. My 4-year-old knows to say, I am sorry that I hit you, that I took your toy, and what can I do to help you feel better? Yet somehow, as we move out of childhood and become leaders in the country, it has become acceptable for leaders who are in charge of the safety of thousands of children and athletes to refuse to acknowledge the massive failures that have led to the life-altering abuse of the innocent who were placed in their protection. The survivors of every one of these abusers have asked for answers. They have asked for the truth and transparency, and they deserve this. This is critical to their own healing process because the heartbeat of survivors is to know that what happened to them is not going to happen to the next generation. And second, honest and transparent assessments are critical for child protection because you cannot fix what you will not accurately diagnose. When the culture that led to these abuses is not thoroughly understood and honestly discussed and diagnosed, education programs are a mere Band-Aid designed to make a gaping wound look palatable. When the policy and structure breakdowns in an organization have not been thoroughly understood, policy reform fails to be effective. When you as Canada's leadership do not have a thorough and complete information and understanding on which individuals in leadership enabled abuse, turned a blind eye, or perpetuated a destructive culture, you will have no ability to discern whether the leadership changes are effective or simply a regime change from one toxic system to the next. It is more than appropriate for you as Canada's leaders to ask how it is possible that Gym Canada, for example, could select as one of your high-performance leaders a U.S. high-performance coach from my country who was part of the deeply abusive system that produced my perpetrator, Larry Nassar. Why complete regime change in the USA gymnastics program resulted in Gym Canada selecting one of those very same coaches to run your allegedly new and improved program. It is more than appropriate for you to ask how Gym can in one breath say they have changed while refusing to release the alleged investigation clearing Mr. Gallardo of abuse allegations, while the survivor who has come forward testified she was never consulted during this investigation. It is fitting for you as Canada's leaders to ask how Gym can suggest that true change has taken place after Kyna Fletcher was named as national team lead, when Ms. Fletcher silenced her own athlete who spoke out about sexual abuse she suffered by a coach who has now been banned for life. And after Ms. Fletcher herself testified on behalf of this prolific sexual abuser against the athletes who had risked everything to protect the next generation. Ms. Fletcher and the victims of David Brubaker literally stood on opposing sides of stopping a pedophile. And Gym Can looked at those 11 victims of childhood sexual abuse, and they looked at the woman defending him, and they said to the woman defending the pedophile, "We pick you." It is appropriate to ask how Gym Can could profess to prioritize athlete safety after retaining Lori Henderson to run your junior national program, despite multiple athletes reporting abuse by Ms. Henderson.
Please
and
wrap
how Gym
up.
can suggest, thank you. It is absurdity in the highest degree to suggest that there is an understanding of these issues and that if anything has changed when this has taken place. And it is fitting that this has come before the Heritage Committee because your children are your heritage.
Thank you, Ms. Den Hollander. We have to move on. We go now to Kiera McCormick. Kiera?
My name is Kiera McCormack. I'm a professional soccer player, a whistleblower, and a board member of PFA Canada, the first pro soccer player union in Canada. As an athlete, I was forced to leave Canada to escape abuse. Today, 16 years later, I live abroad, not feeling safe to stay in Canada professionally or personally because of the truth that I have shared. Online, as I have watched these government hearings and seen countless athletes bravely re-traumatize themselves telling their horrific stories, I can't help but ask myself, how many more stories will it take for those of you in government to demand a national inquiry and implement real change? In 2007, I left Canada after reporting abuse by my former Whitecaps and Canadian national team coach Bob Berarda. A year later, in 2008, he was fired for sexual misconduct against Canada under-20 national team players, yet inexplicably was allowed to continue coaching teenage girls by Canada Soccer. For 12 years, myself and others reported this known predator repeatedly to no avail. In February 2019, seeing no other options to get him off the field, I published a story in a blog entitled A Horrific Canadian Soccer Story, the story no one wants to listen to and everyone needs to hear. The blog went viral and victims came forward. Today, Berarda sits in jail, convicted of sex crimes against 4 former teenage players over a 20-year period. The last victim was from 2008, the year that the Vancouver Whitecaps and the Canada Soccer covered up publicly his departure as a mutual parting of ways. Yet the worst of the ordeal was not Berarda's abuse. Rather, it was realizing that for the decade we tried to report Berarda, the silencing we faced wasn't born out of a dysfunctional system, but rather was done with a willful precision. A system where to play sports in Canada meant and means doing so with a deliberate lack of protection from abuse, as well as a threat of retaliation speaking out about it. As I watched a few weeks ago while MPs in this room spoke glowingly to members of Canada's women's national team, I couldn't help but think of Charmaine Hooper. You probably have never heard of her. I bet you didn't know that she was the most decorated player in Canadian soccer in the late 90s and early 2000s. I bet you also didn't know that in 2006, herself and 2 other players that together had represented Canada 243 times didn't show up to a national team game in protest of an abusive national team environment and were thrown off the team. And despite using all of the proper resolution channels, including the CDRCC, all 3 never played for Canada again. I bet you believe the heroes in Canadian soccer from the last 3 decades were those scoring goals and winning medals. But I'm here to tell you that the players who deserve your admiration are the ones you've never heard of. The ones who took a brave stand against abusive coaches. The ones who took a brave stand against abusive coaches and administrators with no protection and lost everything. Their voices and their treatment matter equally, if not more, to those who stayed silent and played on, and their stories deserve to be told through a national inquiry. These hearings have outlined rampant conflicts of interest, zero oversight over money, and a massive power imbalance between athletes and the gatekeepers of Canadian sport organizations, causing immense harm. Many of these groups and people have testified or been spoken about during the government hearings in the last few months. Let me recap some of the learnings, starting with Canada Soccer Business, a for-profit business that has made a preposterous and secretive 20-year deal with our nonprofit NSO Canada Soccer. The committee is now aware that there is no record in Canada Soccer meeting minutes that this ludicrous deal was ever ratified, along with Canada Soccer board members who have stated explicitly that they did not sign off on this deal. We've heard from and about Victor Montagliani. He was found in these hearings to be involved with the above CSB deal. He was also identified in the July 22 McLaren report to have been directly involved in covering up for a now convicted sex offender, along with Peter Montopoli, someone who should also be called to answer for his despicable conduct in his time with Canada Soccer. Both continued untouched in their prominent roles at FIFA. And I can't help but wonder, will you force us to watch Montopoli and Montagliani take center stage at the Canadian taxpayer-funded 2026 FIFA World Cup despite the documented harm they have caused, or will this government step up and take a stand against their behaviour? Outside of soccer, we've heard about for-profit, safe sport groups such as ITP and Sport Law operating like wolves in sheep's clothing, who present themselves as a safe place for vulnerable, abused athletes, not revealing that in actuality they are paid by and to protect the interests of sport organizations who have caused these same athletes harm. Then there's an academic receiving millions in government funding to research safe sport, who, according to a witness that stood before you, attempted to silence him when he came to her with an abuse claim in her role as Gymnastic Canada's welfare officer, an organization riddled with abuse. Then there's law firms such as Rubin Tomlinson displaying zero moral compass, who present their normalized lie to sport abuse victims such as our group as doing independent investigations, when in reality their glorified PR jobs with an attorney-client privilege to abusive organizations neither fit the definition of independent nor an investigation. It's a team effort to operate the status quo of harm, and the list goes on and on. So I again ask all of you here today, what will it take for a national inquiry to finally commence, or will this silent complicity by our Canadian government continue? Because I will tell you, those whose egregious actions have been revealed in these committees are hoping you will forget about their conduct, allow them to retain their money and power, and that in a few short weeks that this will all go away. Instead, I'm pleading on behalf of Canadian athletes to loudly support a national inquiry, an inquiry that will shine a spotlight on how abuse has been allowed to happen, build a new sports system based on safety, accountability, and transparency, and allow people like me to finally feel safe to come home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McCormack. You did it. You hung in there. Well done. Andrea Neal, former Canadian women's national soccer team player and assistant coach, for 5 minutes. Ms. Neal.
Thank you. I played in 4 World Cups, was a captain on the national team, and also helped coach Canada in a 5th World Cup. So I bring over 30 years of experience from which to speak. It's been encouraging to witness these hearings. At the same time, it's been disheartening to watch the responses to your questions and the answers of Canada Soccer. It hasn't always been accurate or honest. I know because I was there, deeply involved in the reporting on the Bob Berardi sexual abuse case, the Federation's mishandling of finances, and their neglect of the women's program. Their communication style is harmful and not trustworthy. This is often the case. I know this is how the old boys holding the purse strings of power operate, to deny, deflect, and launch a media blitz of misinformation designed to manipulate and defend. It's a pattern of behavior I encountered in working with them. They did more to protect themselves and a sexual predator than they ever did to safeguard players. They responded to a head coach's concerned reports of funding going missing, misleading financial statements, and other unethical acts, not by investigating and sanctioning the manager involved, but by instead promoting him and punishing the women's national team coaches who came forward to report the wrongdoing. As a monopoly not subject to proper oversight, Canada Soccer operates with unchecked power and control, which has created a culture of exploitation and a lack of accountability. Individuals in power in our federation have taken advantage of this authority. They have promoted their own power, influence, and wealth at the cost of safety, health, and the human dignity of those they are meant to serve. This is not surprising, as our leaders are so deeply embedded in FIFA, an organization renowned for its sexism and corruption. But with Canada about to play host to the World Cup, it behooves us to pay attention. The last time we hosted, we violated our own Charter of Rights and Freedoms by giving women's teams inequitable and dangerous working conditions. What legacy does Canada want to leave this time? It should alarm our country that the same men, Victor Montagliani and Peter Montopoli, who have done such a deleterious job of running Canada Soccer, are now in positions to oversee our country's hosting of the 2026 World Cup. The leaders of Canada Soccer have consistently failed to take responsibility. With the Berardi case, we saw their appalling failure to respond to several red flags of abusive behavior. These went well beyond sexual text messages, despite how Montagliani is trying to misrepresent and excuse himself now. There was sexual and psychological abuse of players on the team by Berardi. One ended up as a key witness in his criminal conviction. But Canada Soccer didn't act to protect the community. They negligently shifted his predatory behavior on, shrouding the reason for his departure, so he was back coaching vulnerable girls just weeks later. It took players enduring a 3-year criminal justice process to get Berardi out of coaching, their purpose being to protect others. Canada Soccer should have done that in a day with one sound decision. Business-wise, Canada Soccer clearly lacks acumen, transparency, and accountability. How else to explain not being able to make one of the best women's teams in the world financially sustainable? Canada won gold in the last Olympics, bronze in the 2 games before that. They have been world-class for decades, but get met with Bush League budget cuts and an opaque and questionable business deal that redirects their marketing and sponsorship earnings to the owners of men's professional teams. This is unacceptable. In the past, anyone who has asked for accountability or proper governance was exiled from the Federation or silenced through things like non-disclosure agreements. This toxic and authoritarian culture needs to end. We need a radical overhaul with a much wider representation and scrutiny. The problems with Canada Soccer have long been apparent. The Heritage Committee threatened to pull funding on the Federation back in 2008. please take the action that will institute real change. We need a national inquiry. When Ben Johnson's steroid scandal rocked Canada, we responded by becoming a world leader on doping in sport. This is a pivotal moment for Canadian athletes, to be sure, but we can meet it with the wisdom and the compassion that has been missing from this all. We can transform this difficulty into a more ethical, healthy, dignified, and effective way of administrating sports in our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Neal. We'll go now video conference, lawyer David Walbridge. David, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the committee. My name is David Walbridge. I'm a labor and employment lawyer in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I just want to begin by acknowledging that I'm in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the committee staff for your assistance arranging for my video appearance. Most of my practice involves representing employees and unions across Atlantic Canada in the public and private sector. But beyond the representational work, I have an ongoing interest in legislative matters affecting workers' issues and rights. From a workplace perspective, the provinces in particular have abandoned most athletes, particularly hockey players, but in some cases, any athletes working for a team, soccer, lacrosse, it doesn't matter. This committee should be very concerned about the workplace rights of players. From a safety perspective, having basic workplace rights and a means to having those rights enforced helps to balance a very unbalanced power structure. Many of my comments focus on the Canadian Hockey League and its affiliate leagues and teams. The players who work for Canadian Hockey League teams are young and they're chasing a dream. It puts them in an extraordinarily vulnerable position. In general, young workers are more vulnerable than others. They're inexperienced, often working their first job. They're not aware of their rights, and many are minors working for adults. It's the same for major junior hockey. You have 16-year-olds working with up to 20-year-olds or older. That's who the employer employs. And watching some of the games, it's unimaginable as an employment lawyer to think of a situation where an adult can get into a fist fight with a minor and there's no consequences. But this is what's most troubling. The owners profit. The owners profit off of it. I understand it's a unique workplace. Being an employee player of a hockey team is different than most workplaces, but there's bosses, there are job requirements, the team earns revenue, and the owners desire to make profit off the labor of their players. It's really not much different than any other private sector enterprise. So what has happened in the provinces? Nothing short of a complete withdrawal of any protection for these employees. Most provinces have exempted athlete employees and hockey player employees from many of their minimum labor standards. What happened in Nova Scotia, where I'm from, just as an example, was astonishing. With no public consultation, with reportedly no Canadian Hockey League lobbyists registered in the province, they took away their rights in the middle of the summer by regulation. It was reported in the CBC News that essentially they called to ask the league and the premier changed the law. It was law reform in fast forward. So, and this has now spread to most other provinces, a lack of minimum labor standards for employees. So what should the committee do about it? The committee needs to recommend or have part of any inquiry some option to intervene on behalf of employee players. The committee should recommend that any inquiry or that the federal government instruct its legal counsel to come forward with whatever necessary proposals are required to put in place proper workplace protections for the health and safety of employee players. This could include taking action under the Canada Labour Code to have them declared a federal work or undertaking. This should all be part of any review of safety in sport, not just for hockey, but for all other athletes. This is really about, and we've heard from other witnesses, sort of the shocking imbalance of power that exists, while a significant imbalance of power is between these employees and their employer, the teams, and the league. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walbridge. We move now Fencing for Change Canada. Emily Mason. Thank you, Emily. You did provide your comments to us in advance, but you have 5 minutes. Away you go.
Thank you. Good morning. I'd like to begin by thanking you all for inviting me here today to speak about our little sport that I think is more often associated with The Princess Bride or Star Wars than a modern Olympic event. My name is Emily. You may also know me as the unnamed athlete in a recent Reuters article detailing some of my experiences while training under Igor and Viktor Gansevich at Dynamo Fencing Club in Vancouver. But I'm not here today to speak exclusively to my own history of abuse. I'm here to speak on behalf of the dozens of other Canadian fencers who have been brave enough to share their stories and desire for change. Like what you have already heard from so many other sports, there has been a culture of toxicity, bullying, and abuse pervasive in Canadian fencing for decades. I'd like to tell you a story about a coach named Kyle Foster. In 2018, Kyle Foster hosted several female national team athletes at his home for a training camp prior to an international event. Some of those girls were underage. While under his care, Mr. Foster brought out sex toys. He demonstrated how to use those sex toys on himself and on some of the athletes. He encouraged them to go to a sex club. A complaint was filed, wrongdoing found, and as a sanction, Kyle Foster received a year-long no-contact order against some of the athletes who were involved. In 2020, another complaint is filed, again alleging sexual harassment involving a minor. The independent third-party investigation again found wrongdoing. And the sanctions? An apology letter, a 1-year no-contact order with the survivor, and a 4-month ban from competition during a time of the pandemic where there were no events being held regardless. After some pushback from the survivor, the CFF posted these sanctions on their website, though they were taken down after 4 months. Kyle Foster is the owner of the Canadian Fencing Academy in Oakville, Ontario, team leader at Toronto Metropolitan University Fencing, and is an accredited member of the Canadian Fencing Federation, the CFF. If his recent social media is any indication, he's been advertising his children's programs as recently as February 8th. I wish I could tell you that this was the only incident of misconduct that we've heard over the past months, but the heartbreaking reality is that we've heard story after story of maltreatment at the hands of coaches and other individuals associated with the CFF from across the country. Again and again, we've also heard that survivors are afraid. They are afraid that if they come forward, they will face not only personal retribution from their abusers, but also risk losing their national team spots. This is because under the current CFF selection policy, national team members may be chosen by majority vote of CFF officials and staff, rather than by results or official rankings. For many athletes, coming forward with their stories of abuse could mean not only losing their profession, but their lifelong dream of competing for Canada. Stories like Kyle Foster's show athletes that their voices will not be heard, even if they do decide to navigate the complicated process of reporting their maltreatment. So what is left for athletes to do? If they choose to come forward, they risk everything that they have worked for in exchange for what? An apology letter? This is why we created Fencing for Change. We love this sport. This is where we've grown up, met our closest friends, and learned our most valuable lessons. But our athletes are hurting. My friends are hurting, and it's time for change. Our hope is to keep the positivity that sport can bring, while making the culture one that supports athletes' success on and off piste. To achieve that change, we must first understand the full breadth of the issue. And this is why a public inquiry into Canadian sport culture is so imperative. It is not to say that an inquiry will solve the issues that it will uncover, but it will provide an informed framework from which we can build a supportive future. We're at a pivotal time in the history of Canadian sports. The momentum of athletes coming forward is a force that is too strong to silence or to redirect. And we now have the responsibility to decide what kind of legacy we will leave behind for all future athletes to come. Will it be one scarred with our stained history of abuse, of sacrificing child well-being, of prioritizing medals over the lives of athletes? Or will we be part of the change? We as athletes have done our part. We're here to ask for your help in the next steps towards a safe and inclusive community of sport in Canada, where all are welcome to experience the absolute joy that sports can bring. That step can only be achieved through a national public inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mason. In fact, thank you very much to all four of you. We have questions and answers now. I would recommend you wear your earpiece, as some of the questions will be in English, others will be in French. In front of you, you have the gadget here that will help you cipher out the questions. So it will be a 6-minute round for each of the first round, and we'll start with Mr. Shields from the Conservative Party. Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses being here today. Very much appreciate your stepping forward. And as you've heard, many others before you have been here and appeared before us, so appreciate that very much. Ms. Mason, in a sense of the sport is fencing and has many different parts to the fencing. It's what we see in international competitions, Olympic athletes in your profession that you have chosen. But I would like to ask you, starting with a different question, a sense of how this has affected your family. How has this affected the broader people that you live with outside of the sport? How has it affected you and your family?
Sure. When I left the sport when I was 17, I was a broken individual. I was in a mental health crisis. I attempted suicide. I was seeing a mental health professional. The difficulty that my family has gone through in the years since I left the sport has been immense. It's been now 5 years, and it will be a part of our lives for years to come. No parent wants to send their child into an environment that they believe is abusive, and yet no child often recognizes their own situation as being abusive when you're in it. I didn't know what happened to me was wrong, so I didn't come home and say that something was wrong. So the guilt they feel from that is a difficult thing for all of us, I think, to come to terms with.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And I think that's a critical piece to what we have learned about and need to pay attention to as the extended family and what it causes for them. Thank you. When you talked about the organization, would you say the case of mishandling extends to the current executive level of this organization?
I would say that, echoing Ms. Dunn-Hollenhander's statement, that the current leadership has a responsibility to aid in the healing and take accountability for all accounts of mishandling that have come forward, regardless of the fact it happened now or if it happened historically. We need these issues to come forward. They need to handle them appropriately if they were involved or not. It makes no difference.
So when we've heard testimony and today when they talk about policy, which is something we've often looked at as organizations, do they have a structure, do they have a policy? But we're hearing there's more to it than just a structure and the policy, and you've heard that, you've experienced it. So beyond the structure and policy that we often talk about as we look at organizations, what's your opinion of what we should be paying attention to besides the structure and the policy?
Besides the structure and the policy, I think it's incredibly important to pay attention to the broader culture that allows for these individuals to exploit children. I think in fencing specifically and other sports, there's generally a level of tolerance of maltreatment and abuse because those individuals get results. I think that's unacceptable, and I think that's something that's going to require systemic change beyond policy. It's going to take an entire framework shift in how we approach sports.
When you mention an example of those people who are chosen to be in events by a vote rather than by performance, that's something we are not going to see in a policy. How are we going to find that level to reward those people in performance rather than a voting structure? How are we going to find that?
Well, in the case of the Canadian Fencing Federation, it is actually part of policy that they vote on our team. But if you look at other fencing organizations like the United States, for example, they do use a ranking system that is objective. And so if you're looking for these policies, they do exist. But there are examples how to do it better that you can observe for sure.
I think by highlighting, for example, that it's up to us in the sense of how far we dig into this is to make sure that we find those things, as you've highlighted, that structure, that we make sure that we find those things in policies. Are there other pieces in policies that you haven't mentioned today that we need to pay attention to in your organization?
Our organization, I think it's incredibly important to pay attention to the complexity of the policies, particularly surrounding reporting of abuse. It's incredibly unclear whether athletes are supposed to go to their provincial organizations, the national organization, OSIC, Selection Policy 1, Policy 2. It's incredibly complex, and a lot of it is out of the hands of the survivors themselves, and it's a huge limiting factor, I think, in athletes choosing to come forward.
That's an understanding of the structure. What about the sense, the whistleblower, what happens, as we've heard? How scary was it for you to come forward?
For me, I'm given a sense of protection knowing that I'm no longer a competitive athlete. The reason why I'm sitting here today and not some of our Olympic athletes or athletes who are still competing is that they're still terrified. They're afraid of our high performance director. They're afraid that they're going to be removed from team. I'm very lucky in that sense to be able to have the distance and speak about my experiences. But even so, I'm still afraid of my abusers. It's just I'm fortunate enough to know that there's nothing that he can take away from me anymore.
Because you've lost it already.
Yes.
Thank you. How much time?
You're out of time. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Shields. Thank you, Ms. Mason, for those. We'll go to the Liberal Party now. Mr. Lewis for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses virtually and in person for being here and the bravery you're showing. There was no pathway for many of you. You're the ones that created that path. And that's an important legacy that you need to know, that there are people now that are brave enough to come forward, and it's because of people like you who have led that way. But you're saying that those that are brave enough to call out those issues are still suffering that retribution, and that's one of the things we really, really need to focus on. So maybe I'd start by Ms. O'Neill. As a former captain, as a player for the Canadian Nationals, I think you mentioned there were 5 World Cups as a player and a coach. I appreciate your submission in writing. You talked about the current system puts the onus on the athletes to hold the organizations to account, and that's something that we need to address. You talked about, with mismanagement, financial practices, dispensing of the norms of good governments you mentioned, and then the failure to adhere to their own policies. So we've seen so many times in this study and elsewhere that organizations do their own reports, their own studies, and they seem more performative than anything. What are your concerns about organizations that say they'll take care of it, they'll handle their own strategy development plans, and trying to rebrand themselves? How can we hold that accountability to them?
Well, first of all, when you consider performance, a lot of the performances are occurring despite of it. When players, athletes are calling for transparency over and over and over again, it means that they do not trust. And trust is fundamental to any human relationship. So when you're talking about the ethics of how people are going about it, you can see a pattern of behavior over time. And that's why I cite 30 years. Because what people are saying and the leadership are saying and the lived values of what they're doing over time, you can see the attitudes come out through the behaviors of what that reality is. And so right now, the sports organizations, there's a big gap between what they're saying and what they're doing. And this is a massive problem. So one, either leaders need to take reflective approach to what has come forward, whistleblowers coming forward or people saying there's a lack of transparency, look at their own leadership approach. That takes a lot and a lot of vulnerabilities of leaders to do that. That takes a lot of work and humility. If you want to make the problem go away, then now you need to excuse the whistleblowers because there's a conflict with inside the person. And they have to rectify that somehow, either within themselves to change their own behaviors, or you need to make voices go away. So it's a double-edged sword. There's the first victimization, say, of the former U20s, and then there's the institution's response to that. That can be as harmful, if not more harmful. And it impacts, as Emily just mentioned, the culture, not just then, but into the here and now.
I appreciate that answer. And then to get back to also in your suggestions was the executive financial practices about being able to see what can we do, the importance of that forensic auditing. How can that also held to be, have organizations be held to accountability?
Absolutely, and I think that the national inquiry is the scrutiny that needs to happen. A forensic audit into the finances going back 20 years will give evidence to the types of patterns of behavior that have occurred financially. So when things and questions have been asked in the past by coaches or athletes, when they're striving for compensation, for example, player compensation packages, and that transparency is not forthcoming, or money and camps all of a sudden seem to disappear, that's really questionable. It's hard to steady a boat in the direction of performance if there is a lack of trust there in our relationship. So I think the time is now for a deeper scrutiny, not to criticize and blame and shame people, but we need to know where we are, where we've been, in order to course correct and aim in an appropriate way.
You mentioned also in your written submission that your success, the national teams, both the men and women's, have come despite the current system. Can you describe how a more safe and responsible culture will not only benefit the safety and well-being of our players, which is first and foremost why we're here, but also focus to more success? Sometimes we're seeing a pushback of, well, these suggestions will come at a loss of competitiveness. Can you help by explaining how this system, that we can successfully bring up a generation of athletes who are safe and can still be competitive?
Well, I think the start point is to define what safety is. That means free from harm, and that has to be our aim. In order to create an environment and a culture where people can be healthy, thrive, and perform at their best effectiveness, it has to be free from harm, because you cannot thrive. You're in defense mode and protective mode. And what damages human relationships, for example, is a lack of trust. That is fundamental. So if you don't get that going, and the very people that are assisting to help court or chart the course as far as the boat is concerned, are often drilling holes in the side of the boat. How can you perform if that's happening, if it is not an honest relationship, a supportive relationship moving forward, where people inside the boat are having to bail water? How can you perform under those circumstances to the best of your ability? You may be able to override it for the short term, but it comes at a cost of relationships, of health and well-being. And it doesn't just impact a person then and there, it impacts their careers, but their health and well-being for decades down the road.
Thank you, Ms. Neal. Thank you, Tim, very much. We move to the block. Sebastian Lemire. Go ahead, Sebastian.
Merci.
6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to say that this has been very, very upsetting, and more upsetting than I expected. I did prepare for the testimony, but I just need to thank you all for your courage. I am so angry that people just remain passive in the face of all of this. Now, I don't know where this has to be done. I don't know that a committee is the right place. I think there has to be an independent place so that there is truly follow-up to what you're saying. We have heard about all kinds of cases, whether it be cases of sexual abuse, financial abuse, psychological abuse. These are all very, very hard cases to listen to, and I just don't understand why things aren't happening faster at a political level. I truly, truly find this so unfortunate, and I'm so thankful to you for advancing the cause. I'd like to start with Ms. Den Hollander. First of all, I'd like to salute your courage in being the first to come forward. You were really an agent of change through your actions and through your words. And I'd like to know how important Judge Aquilina's ruling was for American gymnasts, and what is your reaction to what you heard here today?
Absolutely. Thank you. I think Judge Aquilina's ruling was absolutely critical because it was a value statement. It communicated how much those survivors of Larry's abuse were worth. And what you have before you today is also a values question. How much are your children worth? Because this is the reality. Every time your athletic organizations are choosing an action, whether that is passivity, whether it is an assessment that is really designed to be a PR stunt, whether it is silencing survivors, every time your athletic associations take an action, every time you take an action, you are in essence pulling out a scale. And on one side of that scale, you are placing, and the athletic associations are placing the priorities that they have. Maybe it's a desire to win, fear of loss of reputation, a desire to protect assets or professional relationships, a goal that those organizations have. And then on the other side, they are placing the children who are going to pay the price for the choice they make. Judge Aquilina's ruling was critical because it sent the message that our children matter and that these survivors matter. And right now, I think what you have clearly heard in front of you from these athletes and from so many who have testified before is that the athletic organizations who are in charge of athlete and child safety right now are pulling out that same scale. And they are saying our organization and our reputation matters more. I really appreciated Ms. O'Neill's answer about how safety really contributes to athletic success. But I'd like to reframe that question for you a little bit, because again, we have to go back to our core values. And when we start with the question of how can we make sure we still win, what we are really saying is maybe winning is more important than our athlete safety. How do we make sure we get to this end goal? And hey, if we can keep kids safe, that's great too. I would submit to you, members of parliament, that that is the wrong goal to start with. That our question really ought to first and foremost be, how do we contribute to making sure our children are safe? Understanding that safety is also fundamental to athletic success and professional well-being. And what you have heard before you today is that all of these organizations have engaged in nothing more than PR stunts. It has been a regime change from one toxic system to another toxic system. The assessments and inquiries that have been put before you, where these organizations have said, oh no, we understand everything that has gone wrong. They have lacked transparency. They have not involved survivor voices. They have not been set up in a way that is safe for survivors to engage, and that is actually looking to get to the truth of what's taken place. And my field of professional expertise is institutional transformation, setting up these types of processes so we can actually find out what's gone wrong. Let's diagnose the complexities of what led to this child abuse and this athlete abuse so that we can make sure it doesn't happen again. And this is complex. It involves culture, it involves policy, it involves structure, it involves a lot of things that we don't think of as directly tied to child abuse, like how board systems manage their finances and selection processes. Having a national inquiry that can look into, that can look into the complexity of those dynamics to accurately diagnose what took place, to accurately identify individuals who were part of that toxic system, so that those individuals are no longer in charge of child and athlete safety, is an absolutely critical step. And it really starts with that fundamental question of what are your children worth? That is what you have to decide today.
Je partage tout à fait.
I absolutely share your opinion. Thank you so much for that. Ms. McCormack, how can Sport Canada ignore these voices that have been raised? Do you feel their response and the minister's response has been adequate? Is it your feeling that all the third-party investigations that have been submitted to Sports Canada are enough currently?
I think, you know, as someone that obviously now has come here twice and broken down, talking about what happened to us, I think it's, you know, shocking, honestly, that there's nothing being done. And it feels sometimes disheartening as to how many times do we need to keep showing up and how many times do we need to keep telling all of you that this is, like, you know, I think for the four of us has massively impacted our lives. in a really substantial manner. Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't understand how, as just on a human level, that you can literally witness the car accidents like over and over, all of our stories, all of our sports. It's all of the same thing. So from that perspective, I think it's been very disappointing in terms of the larger. I don't understand what's holding back a national inquiry. You know, why? How can we cheer on our athletes if we're telling you that this is the reality of what it looks like behind every single sport, province, gender, you know? So, yeah, I mean, I think, and you just wonder, is she even watching? Is the Minister of Sport watching? Is the Prime Minister watching? Is whoever is making these decisions, are they watching? Because, you know, it's very much impacted our lives far past our sporting careers. And it's just so just disappointing, and like, I just feel ashamed, honestly, to be a Canadian, that this is the reality of what it means and the response to being a Canadian athlete. And this is the response to so many of us coming forward for months now, telling you that this is the reality behind the Olympic medals and all this kind of thing. You know, it's.
Thank you, Ms. McCormack. We do have to move on. Thank you very much, Sebastian, for the questions. We'll move now to the New Democratic Party. Mr. Julian for 6 minutes.
J'ai pas de mots.
Words cannot describe how I feel when I listen to this kind of testimony. What you're saying is so upsetting, and what you've said, and we are here to listen.
That you've endured, and we hear your powerful voices. And Ms. McCormack, when you say we can't continue with the status quo of harm, that is something that I think every member of this committee absolutely agrees with. And we are wedded to that idea as well. We have to stop the harm. That's why we've been having these hearings. That's why we continue to hear this profound testimony from each of you, and thank you. We've heard your voices on a public inquiry, and I think that is something that, as a committee, we will be discussing as part of the report that we have to prepare. Personally, I absolutely support the call for a public inquiry. But what I want to ask you is, what has to happen now? What does the federal government need to be doing now with Canada Soccer, with Fencing Canada, with Boxing Canada, with Gymnastics Canada? What are the measures the federal government needs to put into place now? These are all organizations funded by the taxpayer. They've had basically carte blanche. They've had a blank check to do whatever the hell they want. And the astounding, appalling, horrific stories of harm and abuse that continue and that are perpetuated obviously shows that Sports Canada and the federal government haven't been doing their job. What would you like to see the sports minister announce this week that obliges each of these organizations to fill their mandate of not doing harm, protecting the athletes, protecting the public?
I think what's completely lacking, and this is just from conversations with all of us, is an athlete organization. You know, these sport, you know, NSOs, as we've all said, we're little specks, and they control the funding, they control the power, they control who's getting chosen. So I don't think things can change until there's some sort of body that is, again, represents our interests, our voice, that, again, you know, where if they know that there's that we're represented, that, you know, we're not trying to play your sport and then fight these monsters at the same time, you know, and that there's a collective, even again, where, you know, just to be able to, somebody like Miriam that's now getting sued by her coach for going through the sport process through defamation, like, that's coming out of Miriam's pocket, you know, to fight back for basically just doing what she's told to do in the sports system and report maltreatment. So that, you know, if there's an entity, so $9 are going to Canada Soccer to basically, you know, have sketchy financial behavior and also, you know, clear cases of abuse. If there was an organization that was protecting us, that from those $9 that are going into Soccer Canada, half that money is going to an organization that fights for our rights and that makes sure that we're okay, that, none of us have received therapy from Canada Soccer for what we've been put through. We've had a private person come forward and give us funding to even be able to approach them. We're so underprotected, underfunded, underrepresented, and yet the sport system does not happen without our participation. It's the most insane setup that it's reflective in terms of what's going on. So I think that that's what needs to happen. There has to be a structural change in the system, that there's an entity that protects our interests and that fights for us so we can just play our sport in a safe environment and enjoy it and not be harmed and not have to be picking up the pieces years after we're done playing.
Ms. Neal?
I think it's very fundamental. Those that are not acting, and while listening to all that has gone on, what is blocking that action? To listen to what athletes have been speaking about with compassionate ears, with wisdom, to look at things from an empathetic perspective, to discern what is going through a very complex situation takes leadership. It takes moral leadership. It takes compass points. It takes courage. So my question is what is holding that decision back? What fears to not take, when people are shedding tears and have been harmed, not to do something about it immediately is also part of the problem. So my fundamental question, as these organizations are doing all of this, who has the oversight for them? And therefore, what is blocking that ability to take action? I don't think that the people that got it into this problem are the people that are going to fix it. So it's going to take a transformative type situation, values-based first, understanding what the purpose of sport is, and just to come back always to the fundamentals. But I think fear is holding a lot of this back.
Ms. Mason?
I agree and echo the statements of the other witnesses here today. I would say that action is important, but rash action without understanding the full context of the issue would be a mistake. I think it's imperative that there is an investigation, a public investigation called as soon as possible. How many more voices do we need to hear before the minister takes action? It baffles me. But I think, as Kira mentioned, mental health support is severely lacking. There is immense trauma that has occurred for so many athletes, and that's going to require immense resources for our community to be able to heal. I'd like to see some of that provided.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with my colleagues with the side of Emily, like the mental health process. Yeah, we need the fund, we need money, we need resources. I'm, after 2 years, still in therapy, and I'm paying. Of course, game plan is helping because I have 2 therapists, but I suffer from dissociation for 6 months, so I can't recall my Olympic, neither my Olympic qualification, neither my Olympic participation. I have no recall of the best souvenir of my life that it's supposed to be. So we need, and all that money is paid from my pocket, and I need to work to pay my therapy. So how am I able to work if I'm not able to work? So I have to go work to earn money to pay therapy. But it's super hard to go to work because I was in a depression state for so long. So yes, we need help on that, please. And we need people to stop people inside the Federation to use our complaints against us in the judicial department in our province. What we were saying and all the complaints we're telling and we're saying and we're using the mechanism you put in place. The government put mechanism in place and put a complaint process in place. But when it's used, it can be used against us, and we don't have the same money power. You have to understand that I don't have the same power of people in my federation that are paid, that are actually employees of this federation. They receive a proper salary. Athletes are not employees of their federation. I'm happy to see that Hockey Canada, they are employees. They are the luckiest one. And yet you see abuse in the federation that are considering their athlete employees. Imagine the rest of us that are not even considered an employee of a federation. How we are treated. We don't even have this respect of being considered an employee, but it's because of us that the system is working. It's
we can
not
come
working.
back to that.
So
we'll come back to that.
yeah, so
okay.
Please help.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. So we'll have the second round. It's 5 minutes for the Conservative and Liberals, 2.5 for the Bloc and the NDP. We'll start first with Ms. Thomas of the Conservatives for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. To the witnesses, thank you for being here. Thank you for being brave, for showing courage, for leading a tremendous effort. So thank you. My first question is going to be for Ms. Den Hollander. You talked about, in your opening statement, you discussed policy, and you said something along the lines of, it is only as good as the motivation to actually make sure that the policy is adhered to. And so clearly we need leaders who are going to step up and be willing to make sure that policy is in fact abided by. Without that motivation, it's nothing more than a piece of paper, some writing, and perhaps a signature. And so my question for you is, when it comes to the honest and transparent system that you were talking about that is needed, I'm wondering if you can break that down a little bit further in terms of what that might look like in order to protect players and their families.
Absolutely. It really does begin with a well-done national inquiry, and this is why. The only motivation, and this is what I tell my children, there are 2 reasons you can choose to do what's right. You can choose to do what's right because you care about the people who will pay the consequences if you don't. Or you can choose to do what's right because you are afraid of the consequences, right? And the goal is that we have organizations and leaders who want to do what's right because they care about the athletes and the children under their protection. But that is not what we have right now. So the only thing that remains at this point in time is motivation out of fear of consequences, knowing that if we do not do this right, the truth is going to be told about what we have done. If we silence survivors, if we stand on behalf of abusers, if we fail to follow our policy, the truth is going to be told. The most powerful thing that members of parliament can do right now is stand up and say, we are going to tell the truth. And if you have not done this right, we are going to tell the truth. And so setting up a national inquiry that has the proper survivor protections in place, this can be done in a way that is trauma informed, that protects survivor identities. We call it personal identifying information. It can be set up in a way that protects survivor PII. That is a collaborative process with the survivor community and with members of parliament where everyone is moving together in the same direction. Let's do the right thing. Let's find out how we can keep our children safe. Let's work together to tell the truth. A well-done inquiry or independent investigation is a truly collaborative process because everyone is headed in the same direction of we are going to do what is right. So it's set up with the proper survivor protections in place. It is set up so that all information that is relevant is accessible and can be told, so that we are truly pursuing transparency and accountability. And it is set up in a way that is very robust, that can look at the culture of the organization as well as policy and structure breakdowns, because we tend to find all 3 things. When you have an organization that is run by individuals who are not geared towards child safety, oftentimes those organizations are set up in a way that the structure allows for communication silos or power imbalances or other corporate structural deficiencies that make it possible to ignore red flags and to cover up child abuse. So you need a very robust inquiry that is going to look at all of those dynamics and is set up in a way that can truly access and report on all relevant information and is done in a way with the proper survivor protections in place. This can be done. I do it all the time. And when everyone is headed in the same direction of let's tell the truth, let's work together to protect the next generation, a national inquiry or an independent investigation is not an antagonistic process. It's very collaborative because everyone is moving towards let's protect the next generation. Let's bring our community together and let's heal what's been done.
Ms. Den Hollander, thank you for your explanation and giving us points to consider there. Much appreciated, and I think just the experience with which you speak as someone who has led these processes is very much taken to heart, so thank you. I'm going to direct my next question to Ms. Neal. One of the things that was stated one of the things that you have stated is that we need a national code that applies to all of our sports federations. I guess I'm curious as to what that would look like. And again, the code is one thing, the enforcement of said code is another. And so I'm curious as to how you would see that played out.
Absolutely, very wise. And I think that we can look to other countries, like we've just brought in this beautiful American example of what's happened to help navigate through these challenging times. If you look at the governance code for England, as far as their high performance and grassroots sporting organizations, they have a common governance code there where the government is very much involved and it spreads down through the organizations. And I think that's a great start point to begin to study what others have done and have been called to action from certain harms or certain situations that have come up in the past. And I think we're trying to find our way through a very confusing situation, yet we can look to other examples. To use this is policies can be flexibly done, education programs can be flexibly done, but we need to challenge ourselves as leaders and influencers of others, very much the ethics and the morals that you can add all policies, but until we look inside ourselves as leaders, the impact that we have in a positive way and what stands in the way of showing up with courage, I think that's the fundamental start place.
Thank you, Ms. Neal. We'll move on to the Liberals. Lisa Hepner for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I would also like to extend my thanks to all the witnesses for your really compelling and important testimony here today. And I'd sort of like to follow on that same vein of finding out what other jurisdictions have done well. And I'd like to go to you, Ms. Den Hollander. Are there any advancements that have been made in the U.S. to help improve the culture of sport there that we can learn from here in Canada?
There are some changes that have taken place that I'm grateful to see. There has been a significant amount of regime change in USA Gymnastics, for example. But I will be honest with you, most of the problems that you are facing right now are problems that to an extent you inherited from moving our safe sports system into Canada. Our safe sports system is incredibly broken. It is underfunded. It lacks proper victim protections. It has a lot of policies in place from a top-down level that make it very difficult for our athletes to report. And there has been a stunning lack of transparency in our athletic organizations. If you speak to the gymnasts in the United States, they would tell you that USAG to a large degree has lacked the type of transparent assessments that we have asked for, contrasted with the UK gymnasts who felt that the White Report in general at least gave them a voice. And it gave them the opportunity to say, yes, we feel like you have really understood what's gone on. There are some models that I have set up in the United States that worked primarily actually with religious denominations, very large and complex religious denominations. Those processes have been much more robust and therefore much more successful than what has taken place so far in our athletic organizations. But really the key is you want the survivors to be able to come out and say, we have been heard. We believe these organizations have truly grappled with the complexities of what led to our abuse. And the reason that you want survivors to be able to say that is first because it's critical to their healing, and we have a responsibility when we cause harm to aid in the healing process. And second, because the heartbeat of survivors is to know that my story means something and that what has happened to me is going to make the next generation safer. And it is entirely possible to set up processes where both the leaders of the organization who are heading in the right direction come out and say, that was so helpful for us. We now understand what we need to do. And whether survivors can say, we feel like we have been heard and we have confidence that the truth has come out and that there's an understanding of what's taken place. And then you've got the long road ahead of you of rebuilding, but you have the knowledge base for what went wrong so that the diagnostics have been done and the reform can be accurate and effective, that provides closure for the survivor community and provides a path forward that is actually effective and makes good use of resources and accurately protects the next generation.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to turn to you, Mr. Walbridge, next. I believe I heard you say in your opening statement that provinces have abandoned athletes. You were talking about basic workplace rights that are required. So when we go forward with a national inquiry in this country, what will the onus be on the provinces? And can you talk a little bit about how that might work, how that cooperation should work?
Yes, thank you. Well, what has happened in virtually every province, there's one or two exceptions, is employees are covered under the minimum standards legislation, labor code, employment standards, however you want to describe it. Federally, it's Part 3 of the Canada Labor Code. And what has happened across the board is that players, sometimes it's in some jurisdictions it explicitly lists hockey player employees, and in others, like in my province in Nova Scotia, it just says athletes are exempted from, and then either the entirety of the code or sections of the code. So that is a problem. Listening to the witnesses talk about their particular situations and myself imagining the work I do for employees is that when you take away any workplace rights and you take away any means to enforce those rights, a culture can perpetuate that results in harm and a whole variety of harm. And so I would hope that this committee would look at this huge gap that's being created for athlete players, and as part of the proposal for an inquiry, and in your report say that this has to be on the table and you'd have to pull the provinces in. The other component to look at, and I suggested this in my initial presentation, is what authority can the federal government do to assert jurisdiction in the absence of the province's participation? And there are means under the Canada Labor Code and under the Constitution Act where that could be appropriate. Obviously, those are very delicate constitutional questions that the government would want to and would need to get advice on. But it's got to be there. You can't allow this culture of exploitation, whether it's in amateur sport or in professional sport, continue for anybody, and particularly for any employee players.
Thank you, Mr. Walbridge. We'll move now 2.5 minutes to the block. Mr. Lemire.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to continue with Mr. Walbridge. Stephanie Grandmont in La Presse over the summer said something that describes what's happening in the sports. She said that a fish always starts rotting at the head, she said, and there's a bad smell that you get when you smell this rotting head, and that's what's happening in sports. What happened in Hockey Canada is happening in all sport areas. Hockey Canada reviewed its funding pretty quickly, I should say, but there was no public accountability, and the minister is the one that has a lot of the power. What do you think about the funding being provided to Hockey Canada?
I was surprised to read about that in the news because it seemed like it was the return of funding, but none of the questions answered. The work of this committee not concluded. So it was very surprising. Again, much of my experience is employment law and workplace related, but what you can clearly see is there's a culture of exploitation that runs through the ranks, right through to organizations like the Canadian Hockey League, where the power imbalance is incredibly dramatic. And as that culture continues to perpetuate, the players live in that system and are victims of that system. and then then they move on to then become part of that in the broader sense. And until that gets broken down and through the investigations that this committee is doing, through bringing in, and was mentioned that either you do it through sort of voluntary means where people just want to be better, or like I agree with Ms. Den Holder when she said sometimes there just needs to be a law that's enforceable, where there's rules, where people know what those rules are, and the people who are affected by it, the players across the board, have the power to have those things enforced.
Merci.
Thank you. I like your idea about legislation that provides these kinds of rights to the people involved and to be able to play in safely and free of harm.
Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Right on time. We go now to Peter Julian, NDP. Peter, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Ms. Den Hollander, I asked the question to other witnesses that were here about what Sports Canada, what the sports minister needs to do right now, in addition to the call from the public inquiry that we've all heard. What do you believe that minister needs to be insisting on, obliging Gymnastics Canada to do?
I think one of the primary steps that hopefully can be taken is putting anti-SLAPP type of legislation into place or protections into place so that survivors are able to act as whistleblowers without fear of retaliation, without fear of being left unprotected when their abusers come after them, without fear of having to forfeit their point system and their career, to be able to put protections in place to allow survivors to speak up and to do so safely. But honestly, again, the most important thing that anybody can do is how we communicate on issues of abuse. When the message is, and I really appreciated the most recent question saying, what do you think about the money being returned to Hockey Canada when there really hasn't been transparency? When that type of action is taken, when any type of action is taken, it is a communication. It is a value statement. And so when you have communications taking place and actions taking place that are making value statements that we're not going to require transparency. We are not going to require honesty and accountability. We are not going to require proper diagnostics. When that is taking place, what the government is essentially saying is it matters, but not actually. We don't like child abuse, but we don't not like it enough to say, hey, we are not going to fund these systems while they are harming our athletes and children. The most important thing that leadership can do is communicate very clearly in their words and their actions that this matters, that we are going to find the truth and we are going to tell it. And we are going to use whatever resources are at our disposal to make it safe for those athletes and those children to come forward so that we can find out what has happened to them. What we say and do is a communication on our values.
Thank you very much. Merci.
Thank you. Ms. De Silva Rondo, you spoke about whistleblowing. And Ms. Den Hollander has spoken about the importance of this as well, the importance of resources and better resources for whistleblowers. What do you think should be instated immediately so that whistleblowers are protected within this system? Well, there has to be legal protection. Any complaints and any reports within the sports system should be able to be taken up publicly. In Quebec, we have a legal system that is different from the one in Ontario, for example. So every province operates differently. But you can still decide to use the legal system, and anyone can use the legal system. But when you have whistleblowing within the sports system, they should remain in that sports system so that they can run their course, so that there is a process that works.
We'll move now for 5 minutes, Ms. Gladue for the Conservative Party. Marilyn?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for your courage today and your testimony. I took note that each of you has asked for a national public inquiry. And I heard Ms. Hepner say when the government conducts an inquiry. So I think the minister needs to weigh in on this. She's been hugely silent. I took your comments, Ms. Mason and Ms. McCormack, that she has been absent in terms of action. She has known about all of the things that are going on in these various sporting organizations and continues to fund without concrete actions. Some of the actions that we've heard that could be done while an inquiry is being held, vulnerable sector checks for every coach and person that's involved. This is something that happens in most charitable organizations across the country. Reporting of sexual abuse to the police. It's a criminal offense. These organizations should not be investigating it themselves. And a registry to prevent these predators from going from one place to another and continuing the cycle of abuse. The anti-SLAPP legislation that was mentioned, making protection for whistleblowers and ranking systems that are objective. And then I think there's something to be done in governance, because it's clear that although there's governance in all of these organizations, it's not working. So Ms. Mason, do you have some comments about the governance? I know that you have an opinion here.
Yes, thank you. I think, as we've mentioned already, the governance of the Canadian Fencing Federation has an immense responsibility here to take accountability for all the past misconduct that's occurred, all the misconduct that's continued. Specifically, I think they need to take accountability for the appointment of Igor Gancevich as High Performance Director. I think on a broader scale, there needs to be a widespread change in not only selection policies, but also in reporting policies so that it is safe for survivors to come forward and they feel supported. It needs to be trauma-informed. And with those two things together, I think it's a good start.
Very good. I also want to talk about retribution, because we've heard a lot about people coming forward and telling their stories and how difficult that is and traumatizing. But then on top of it, they're punished. Either they lose their spot or in some cases there are other kinds of retribution. So Ms. Rondeau, was I correct that you're being sued as a result of coming forward? And are you allowed to describe the circumstances, how this came about?
I'm not. This is why I'm being sued. It's to silence me as a victim.
And Ms. Neal, could you talk about retribution in soccer?
Well, I can draw upon personal experience where everything was going A-OK. Actually, not A-OK. I had reported with the Bob Berarda situation. A few months later, I became an assistant coach, and things seemingly were okay. But the moment I was offered contracts and I was offered help to get my coaching certification, after I helped the head coach come forward, there were discrepancy and a lack of ethics within the women's national team program, then the certification was blocked. Money was also blocked for me. And what I saw was what I would consider institutional gaslighting towards the head coach, and my experiences of making her job so difficult moving forward. She couldn't get information, the correct information, or other information was dumped on her. She could not chart the course appropriately and could never grab a hold of the ship to chart its course. And you think that people coming forward talking about ethical situations, well, that person was given a promotion, she was given great difficulty. The whistleblowers coming forward are trying to say you're way off course, and they should be held in a supportive environment and instead are looked as the problems.
Yes, I'm very concerned about the heads of organizations, that multiple heads that we have heard, names listed today and names in other sessions that are part of the problem and not part of the solution, that are still at the top of the governance. And the Minister of Sport, who is at the top of that pyramid, needs to take some action and address that. Ms. McCormack, you mentioned in your testimony something about
Quickly.
silent complicity. Could you just expand on that, what you mean?
I think just, again, when you don't do something, when you have power to change something and you don't do something, I think that you are contributing to the problem, whether that's on a micro level with our situation with Bob Berarda, the amount of people that were aware of his predatory behavior and did nothing, or now at a macro level with the Minister of Sport or whoever would be the one to pull the trigger to call for a national inquiry. I think when you don't do something, you are complicit, and that is a huge part of the abuse. And that's enabling abuse every time that you don't say something or do something and you have the power to, and abuse continues.
Thank you, Ms. McCormack. We'll move now to the Liberals for 5 minutes. Michael Cotto. Michael.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to start by thanking all of our witnesses here today. I know the committee appreciates your testimony and your commitment to improving sports in general across this country. The stories we've heard over the last few months have been unbelievable. And, just when it comes down to it, for me, when I hear about the abuse that's taking place, especially, abuse to anyone, but when we hear about child abuse, to me, it's just for me, it's something we just need to move on quickly. I've been public in my support for a public inquiry, and I support the witnesses here that are calling for that as well. I wanted to just start off by asking a bit more about whistleblowing and the lack of protections that are in place. We heard today from one of our witnesses that that she came forward and brought forward information and now is being sued. And I know we can't speak specifically to that case, but is there anyone on the panel that can speak to the tactics that are used in a bit more detail, not specifically to the case we heard, but just in general? What are tactics that organizations use to hold back whistleblowers and using the court system and other methods to silence them? Can anyone speak in a bit more detail about that to the committee?
I can personally speak to there are certain clauses within contracts that prohibit people to speak about certain things. So as an assistant coach, when I finally did get a contract with the association, there are certain contracts that are certain clauses that prohibit things like non-disclosure agreements, where you can't talk about the contents of a situation, are tactics that are used to silence people coming forward, or when they have spoken, punish them. So I think that there is also the complicity or the whole culture of permissiveness that is fear-based, that people will not come forward if there is that threat of reprisal. So that is an ongoing cultural systemic issue, that people stay very quiet and aren't willing to risk the coming forward and being a whistleblower.
Yeah. I have a question for Rachel Den Hollander. I hope I pronounced your last name correctly. You talked about value statements and an honest assessment in regards to moving forward and truth and accountability. And I was intrigued about the comment you made about you cannot fix what you haven't diagnosed. Do you see that a national inquiry as being one of the mechanisms to diagnose the challenges that we're talking about today?
Absolutely, for a couple of reasons. One of the things that you have heard repeatedly from survivors and athletes who have testified today and over the past several months is that the organizations are by and large riddled with the same people or groups of people who have been part of the abusive system. And so to suggest that that leadership is capable of doing an accurate assessment, even has the skill and the knowledge base to be able to look at a structure or a policy change or a practice or a cultural dynamic and be able to understand and identify how that plays into child and athlete abuse is just naivety in the highest degree. The people who have been part of the system, or frankly, who just lack the skill sets to be able to do that type of assessment, cannot be in the position of accurately diagnosing what's taken place. So the next question is, then we have to get it outside of that system. And the national inquiry provides you a way to do that. Now, of course, it will need to be set up well. It will need to be set up in a way that survivors are safe to engage and the proper survivor protections are in place and the team is trauma informed. That team will need to have the requisite education and knowledge base to be able to understand athlete wellness and corporate structure. And some of these dynamics that we've heard and have recognized are actually quite complex. Child abuse and athlete abuse extends far beyond what we think of in our child abuse protection policy. These are complex issues, and you need a team of skilled experts who has access to all of the relevant information and set up in a way that is safe for athletes to come forward. But until that process is done, what you've essentially said is looked at all of these organizations that have decades of bodies left behind them and said, we understand that you're part of the problem, but we also think you can fix the problem that you've created. That simply does not work.
Is there any organization that's out there, either in the States or in Canada, that's gone through a process and actually, corrected and made improvements to the system that you can actually point to?
There actually are. I have been privileged to help set up these systems on a very broad scale for some of the largest denominations in our country that have very complex governmental systems and entities very similar actually to athletic organizations. I have also worked with much smaller ones, and it really can be done well, and it can be done relatively easily. As complex as the problems are, the way you get to that is really quite simple. The proper contract structures being in place, the proper scope being set up, and when that is done, and when it is done with leadership and survivors who are both headed in the same direction, we want to do what is right. It really is an intensely collaborative process where everyone is able to come out on the other side saying,
Thank you,
we feel like we
Ms.
now have a path forward.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. And okay, so we're going to go to the third round. We'll see how our time is. The third round would give the Conservative and Liberals 5 minutes each. NDP block 2.5. We'll see. We'll play with the clock after that, but we'll start with the Conservatives. I have Ms. Thomas first.
Sure, thank you. And again, thank you to each of you for coming and being a part of our time here today. My question is for each and every one of you. It's a bit of a rapid fire question, and that is to say this. You have bravely come to committee and allowed your story to stand. We recognize that we've only been able to capture a glimpse. And so in many ways, it feels like an injustice to you and to the life that you've lived. I want to give you one final opportunity, and that is to make a short statement. Again, realize that that's an injustice, but I do want to get through all of you. If you were to say in 1 to 2 sentences what it is that you're hoping for from the sport minister, what would it be? And I will start, I'll just start here with you, Miriam.
I just wish to see this national inquiry started. I think we really need this national inquiry. There's no other, we can put plasters or Band-Aid on problems, but it won't fix the system we're in. So stop waiting and launching this inquiry will be the best thing I think the minister can do.
Thank you.
I echo Miriam, and I would also say that, again, the steps start being taken to have an organization that represents the interests of athletes. So again, we're not fighting these fights on our own. And I think with that sort of in mind, that there's also some sort of support, again, whether it's Miriam has somebody that she can go to and get funding legally, or we don't have to sit around waiting for Canada Soccer to, whenever they feel like getting back to us to give us some, begging them for therapy money, essentially, for the problems that they've caused us. So I think those two things, I would say, adding 100% to an inquiry. Again, the steps starting to be taken towards an athlete organization. Again, not that they set up, but that we set up and support legally and with therapy.
Yes, I think while this transition is going on, it's very unhealthy. So to support athletes and people involved, it's not just the athletes, financially, psychologically, just to help stabilize, very important. I think whistleblower protection is incredibly important because these are the people that are really trying to chime and say there's an issue. I think looking at our legislation towards complicity for people who are involved, the laws there are very weak. And I think without a national inquiry, there's a risk that it's going to be safe sport washing, that it's going to be something but not get to the root of it, and it's only going to create more harm.
I echo again the statements of the other witnesses here today, although I think it cannot be understated that with every passing day, there are more children who are placed into these environments, more children who are experiencing the same things that we have and continue to every single day that a national inquiry is not called and we're not taking action. That is unacceptable.
Ms. Den Hollander.
I would add my voice to these incredible women and athletes who have come to testify. It is time to take action. It is past time to take action. And you, as the leaders of Canada, have a unique ability to say we are going to move forward and we are going to find the truth and we are going to do everything we can to protect the next generation. And I think you've heard very clearly from those who are part of the system what that needs to look like.
And Mr. Walbridge.
Yes, that the minister and the government have the courage to protect all these athletes, and including in that the employee athletes who work for teams and leagues across the country.
Thank you. And I think that concludes my time. So thank you again.
I had 45 seconds left. Ms. Thomas?
I'll allow their voices to stand as the final word.
Thank you. We go to Mr. Housefather of the Liberal Party. Anthony, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to the witnesses for coming forward and for speaking to us today. Your testimony was compelling. It was moving. And I think you highlighted the disequilibrium that exists between the national federations and athletes. When we talked about the fencing selection process, I know a lot of my colleagues may not be totally aware of how that puts power in the hands of federations and coaches. In my sport of swimming, you don't have that. You have the top two finishers at Olympic trials that automatically make the team, provided they made the Olympic standard. But in so many sports, I'm looking at Rachel, and when she was competing in gymnastics, you could finish, second in the Olympic trials in the all-around, but you'd be going back into a room, and Bella and Marta Karolyi would basically make the decision as to who made the Olympic team. And you could be penalized because you didn't go to their training camps, or when Larry Nassar was at their camps and you caused a ruckus, you might not be invited. And that happens in way too many sports. And in our recommendations, I do think we need to deal with that as best as we can. So you are all heroes in my book, and thank you. I want to go to Andrea and Chiara for a moment on Canada Soccer. Chiara, you had mentioned that there was the minutes had never shown the contract with Canada Soccer Business could be signed. As you might remember, Canada Soccer left those out of the initial minutes provided. Then miraculously, minutes turned up after our meeting that suddenly showed an approval of the contract after the fact. But we still know that the Secretary General of Canada Soccer didn't sign the contract as was required to do so, and there's a number of issues around the contract. We're having Canada Soccer, Mr. Reid is coming next week. I would like to give you the opportunity to tell us, in terms of the witnesses that have already appeared from Canada Soccer, where you spotted inconsistencies and inaccuracies in their testimony, and tell us right now what those were so we could follow up next week with Mr. Reid. Andrea, I don't know if you want to go first.
When you look at, with regards to the Bob Berardi situation, I know it's Steve Reid, but he was also there during the periods of time. This wasn't just about sexual text messages. This was about much, much more. And the sexual text messages are a form of grooming and incredibly damaging. But this was much more that I had personally reported to their independent fact finder, Adam Chopra, back in the day, for them to continue saying that there was no cover-up, that it was handled appropriately, is a major issue. And to not acknowledge that by the leadership in Steve Reid, to the leadership beyond that, into today is a very damaging thing, and continues to not give voice to those people, to say that he just got sanctioned in some of these public hearings when you ask the question, well, he has now been banned. What does that mean? Why did it take until these hearings for them to utter the words that he's suspended now? A police investigation, him in jail should have been enough, but it should have been enough well before that. As far as the finances are concerned, it's concerning that there's everything about the players asking for transparency, the men's and the women's programs, yet it's been unsettling that money has been reported in the past, that things needed to be looked into. Money was not accounted for, and that's never happened. It just seems to get buried in the past, yet that culture continues on year after year.
Can I add?
Kara, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just want to say, first of all, thank you to the committee members, because I know just from watching, especially you with Canada Soccer in the hearing, you know, I think it's been well established, whether it's the McLaren report put all the people at the scene of the crime of the Berardi case. It's not even a question, you know, Victor Montagliani, Bob Lenarduzzi, like these were names in black and white that this report found. So then you have people sitting here like Victor Montagliani saying that he wasn't involved. Well, no, yes, you were. In a report, it said you were involved. So facts. I think, again, what you uncovered also about the finances, about, again, and it's so comical, it's almost a blueprint of how dysfunctional it all is, because, again, the minutes were not there, it was not signed off on, yet this agreement still exists, yet the Federation is essentially bankrupt, you know, the future of Canadian players for the next 20 years. I'm in Ireland playing right now with Canadian players in a women's league. There's no league in Canada. People have to go over there. That is all a part of the CSB. It's all been established. So I think the question now is that there's obviously a huge issue with what now. This has all been established. It's not a question of, Victor, were you there or weren't you? You were there. The evidence has proven that you were there. So I just think that that is all highlighting, again, this lack now of what now. It's, okay, the CSB is not a legit deal because they did not follow the processes. What now? Victor Montagliani and others were at the scene of this whole thing. They're still involved in soccer. What now? I think that's what we need to ask ourselves, because I think in terms of our case, it's quite clear there's been massive financial mismanagement, that there's been massive, you know, egregious behavior with the Berardi situation, and I don't think they're going to be the ones to provide solutions or accountability or transparency, because they've been the ones that, you know, we've had to put in so much to even just get here today after 15 years of fighting for all of this.
Thank you, Ms. McCormack. We'll move on for 2.5 minutes to Mr. Lemire of the Bloc Party.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. De Silva Rondo, you touched on several areas that we need to think about. Now, you've spoken about how this race for gold has an impact on the entire structure. We've asked people who have been on the podium to come and testify before the committee. But I'd like to ask you, why do you think there has been no action? You know, it's been difficult to know what sporting federations have done with the money they've received. Where do you think the responsibility of Sport Canada lies, and where do you think the responsibility lies in terms of the minister? Well, there are people who are supposed to oversee what happens within federations, but we've never seen them. We haven't heard from them, and I think that some of the responsibility lies with them. They have to do their job. They need to audit and monitor what happens within federations. They have to do their job. And I believe that right now, that role has been transferred to on the podium, and the mechanisms that are currently in place and that aren't necessarily working. So it's been up, in other words, to the athletes to monitor these organizations through the complaints process, and that's too onerous for us. Now, on the podium has is supposed to be able to help with accountability, but their power is limited. Now, what's happening within Sport Canada? Where is the monitoring? Well, one thing that I find particularly shocking is that there are people like you who speak out and end up being sued, or as well these non-disclosure agreements, which actually serves as a way to silence those who are speaking out about a toxic culture. And so no one has to be accountable. So how can we change this? How can we better protect people like you who speak up? Well, I have ended up having to find solutions to each situation I find myself in. But I don't know what those future situations are going to be. So I don't know where those solutions lie necessarily. And that's why we need to have a national inquiry so we can find out what's happening and then find out what the solutions are to these. So it's fine for me to find solutions for myself. I'm happy to share what I've had to do in terms of protecting myself and how I've had to use the process. However, and one solution would be that I be able to be protected within the sports sector and that I don't necessarily have to use the legal system. But there are so many situations. You know, I'm a teacher. I'm not an expert in everything. And so I don't have all the knowledge that's necessary. It's up to you to find these solutions.
On 2.5 minutes for Mr. Julian. Peter?
Ms. Mason, when you talked about the situation with Kyle Foster, I was absolutely shocked. The idea that these abuses would happen and that the only protection that Fencing Canada would offer is a no-contact rule for some of the athletes. It seems to me that you might as well be saying to an abuser, just go find new victims. How can anyone feel safe in that kind of environment when a national sports organization does nothing but pay lip service to protecting victims?
Well, I think the simple answer is that people don't feel safe. People don't feel safe coming forward when they do experience maltreatment. And I think stories like Kyle Foster, unfortunately, are very common in Canadian fencing. He is not the only person who has mistreated athletes. It's across all of our provinces. And the CFF has consistently and repeatedly not only mishandled those cases, but bullied our athletes into silence when they have tried to do something. It's difficult still to come forward for a lot of people. And it speaks, I think, to a larger culture of permitting these behaviors because those coaches get results.
Ms. Neal, on that question, but also we heard through the Hockey Canada hearings how Hockey Canada needed to clean house. Canada Soccer has had a couple of resignations, but is it time for Canada Soccer to clean house so that we can build a national sports organization with our soccer players that protects athletes and keeps our values?
Yeah, I think transformation needs to happen, and quite often that's like a forest fire burning through something so the new can renew itself. So I would say that transformation needs to happen through new people. I know board members in the past who have challenged and received physical threats from other board members when they're speaking up for transparency. I've heard of yet another board member that was asking for transparency and accountability around the Bob Berardi situation, and they brought a lawyer in to say that she could not reach out to really empathize with the former U20s. And I mean, this culture gets passed on from one to the next because it gets very homogenized. So even within the present culture, if somebody speaks out for what is right and moral, they're silenced. And that teaches the next generation coming in that this is the appropriate way to behave. And this is very unhealthy.
Thank you, Ms. Neal. I'm going to go to a 2-minute round, and then we'll wrap it up. Ms. Gladue, Conservatives, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. A final question then for our witnesses. It's coming up on a year that OSEC has been in place. So is it helping? Is it what we need? Will it address these issues? Anybody who wants to weigh in?
I'll go first. I think OSIC absolutely is not even close to a solution. I think it's representative of, again, a sports system washing within itself to try to appear that they're solving the problem, but in reality, it's exactly the same people. And if you look again at the links between all the different organizations, so no, I don't think at all that OSIC is an answer. Anybody else?
Do you, the rest of you, agree with that?
Looking
I'd be
deep.
happy.
Oh, there. That's.
Pardon me.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I would thank you. I would echo that. OSIC has a lot of the same problems that our U.S. safe sports system has. I work with athletes trying to navigate that system all of the time. The proper survivor protections are not in place. The investigative teams are not skilled. It takes 2 to 3 times easily the length of time that it ought to take to complete an investigation while the athlete is left unprotected. There are no whistleblower protections in place. The same things that you have heard these athletes articulate are the same problems we are dealing with in the U.S., and it is so deeply re-traumatizing to survivors and so deeply unfair to ask them to navigate a system that is going to leave them more crushed than when they went in.
Ms. Neal.
I don't have much more to add to that. I agree.
You agree?
Yes, I definitely agree.
Ms. Rondo? Very good. And Mr. Walbridge?
I agree.
Excellent. I think that's my time.
Thank you. We'll move to our final question of the day to Mr. Biddle for 2 minutes.
Much, Mr. Chair, and want to echo my colleagues and thanking you all for being here. This wasn't easy, and you're being heard. I want you to know that. My questions will be to Mr. Walbridge. We've talked a lot about the interplay between provincial and federal jurisdiction. We've talked about things like anti-SLAPP legislation, which is provincial. You've talked about employment standards legislation. I know the minister has said that it's not a matter of if there will be an inquiry, but how. Is it fundamental that the provinces be at the table for any type of inquiry so we can address many of the things that have been discussed here today?
Certainly for any, if workplace issues are part of that inquiry, then they would absolutely have to be at the table to account for the decisions that they made to basically withdraw from protecting employee athletes. Absolutely, there's no question about it. It's shocking to hear these stories about how long these athletes have sought justice, and the fact that provinces got a phone call from an owner of a team and changed the laws over a weekend. By comparison, they have to be at the table. They have to answer questions for why that happened. And if they're unwilling to do anything to protect player athletes, then the minister and the federal government need to have the courage to intervene.
And if I can build on, I guess, the myth of in the CHL of the student athlete and that exemption, how has that come to be? Is it like what's happened in the United States with the NCAA, where schools are making millions of dollars and we have hockey teams worth tens of millions of dollars here? How does it come that these athletes are exempted from legislative protections?
How has it come to be?
Yeah,
that they're exempted? Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm most familiar with Nova Scotia, where over the course of a weekend in July, the regulations of the province changed, and the province said the Canadian Hockey League or some owners of teams called them and asked them to do it. And as it's reported, there's not one, the league nor not one single team was on the registry of lobbyists. So how did those conversations take place? I don't know the answer, but it certainly is suspicious. And so, 1 + 1 often equals 2.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you, David, and thank you, Rachel, both on video conference today, and thank you to our guests in person. Thanks to our analyst who is back. Gabrielle and Mike, thank you very much. And I need someone to say? Motion to adjourn. Thank you very much.
Merci, parti aux
And thank you to the interpreters as well. Thank you.